Speak, fool. Finally. This is more like it.
For Khazmatan!
Last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally.
My might cannot be
Tread
matched.
lightly. This is more like it.
I await.
No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers.
I serve only the frozen throne. Must be cheeky. I'll see to it. Cheeky.
Tread lightly. No one orders me around. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it.
Speak. You rang.
What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. Finally.
I serve only the frozen throne. Must bleed. Make your
Speak,
choice.
fool. What is it now?
My might cannot be matched. By Nerub. Cheeky. By Nerub. You rang.
No one orders me around. At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Speak, fool. Finally. At last. No one orders me around. Finally. Frostmourne
For
hungers.
Khazmatan!
Tread lightly. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Your pain shall be legendary. This is more like it. For the Lich King.
A pint for every ghoul ye blast!
At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. At last. This is more like it.
Send off the charges! Blow the bridge before they get across!
No!
Stop them before they...
That was for Muradin. Now you'll never get across.
There are other passages through the labyrinth, Death Knight. We will find another way.
Frostmourne hungers. At last. You will know endless torment. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Finally.
Your pain shall be legendary.
Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it.
I'll make sure you suffer.
Frostmourne hungers. Finally. At last. Finally.
These Nerubians are your kin. Why are they hostile to us?
Many of us who fell during the War of the Spider were brought back to serve the Lich King. These warriors, however, never died. Foolishly, they still fight to liberate Nerub from the Scourge.
Gold. We should take this with us.
Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne.
This place looks like an old storage silo. It's a dead end, Nubarak.
There must be a hidden passage somewhere. We Nerubians were crafty engineers in our time.
Frostmourne. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers.
This is an ancient Nerubian hoarding cell. We kept most of our treasures hidden in chambers like this. The passage to the lower depths lies just beyond this room.
Great. As long as we're here, we can take some of these items with us.
This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers.
Your pain shall be legendary.
Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers.
Don't even try it, you bastard! That there treasure belongs to the dwarves!
This treasure belongs to the Lich King, little creature. We, his servants, shall take what we will.
This is for Muradin, you bastards!
Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it.
It's them! Blast them!
Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally.
Damned undead! Slay them all!
Finally. This is more like it.
I'll make sure you'll suffer.
Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it.
Now, Frostmourne.
Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally.
You will not end
At last. This is more like it. At last. Finally.
Shoot anything that shuffles or skitters!
Finally. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers. For the Lich King. At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last. This is more like it. At last. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? Now, Frostmourne. Finally. At last. This is more like it. At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. This is more like it. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers.
I remember you, evil prince. You're the one that killed poor Luridon.
Get over it already.
I won't let you through this door, traitor. The recent quakes have awakened dark things under the ice. Ancient, horrid things. We vowed to keep them locked where they are.
We'll take our chances, dwarf. We're going through that door, one way or another.
Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it.
Your pain shall be legendary.
Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like it. At last.
The air smells awful in here. Something doesn't feel right.
If the dwarf's story was true, there's no telling what awaits us in the darkness. This stairwell leads into the heart of the old Nerubian Empire. We must be cautious.
By all means. You first.
We have entered the Old Kingdom. Be wary, Death Knight. Whatever scared the dwarves still lurks down here somewhere.
No one orders me around. Finally.
Wait. The towers on either side are rigged to fire bolts of frost. This hallway is a death trap.
Can't we disable them?
The circular hatch in the far wall is an aqueduct plug. If we can open it, the water might flood the firing mechanisms and disable the entire trap.
This is more like it. At last. Finally. This is more like it.
What is it now?
Finally. Frostborn.
Gold. We should take this with us.
Finally. At last. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers.
Now, Frostborn.
Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers.
For the Lich King. Faithless coward.
This is more like it. At last.
That's done it. Let's move.
At last. Finally. At last. This is more like it.
Look, brothers. The traitor king.
Who? Me?
He is referring to me, Death Knight. These Nerubians will stop at nothing to destroy us.
At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last.
Thank you, Great One. The rebel spiders captured my comrades as well. They're being held in a nearby chamber. Release them, and they will be yours to command.
Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers.
No one orders me around.
Finally. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers.
Slay the intruders.
Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. At last.
I'll make sure you suffer. You will know endless torment.
This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last.
For the Lich King.
Finally.
I'll make sure you suffer.
Tread
Death to the servants of Ner'zhul. Eggs of our young are incubated within those breeding pods. There's no telling how many vicious hatchlings they hold.
You were right. They're definitely hostile. We've got to destroy the breeding pods.
We could also seal the doors to shut the hatchlings in.
This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last. This is more like it. For the Lich King. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. This is more like it. Now, Frostmourne. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers.
Drive the foul undead back to the surface.
This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. At last. You will know endlessly.
What the hell are they?
They are the horrors the dwarves spoke of. I thought they were only legends.
What?
They are the faceless ones.
Frostmourne
Forces are under
hungers.
attack.
At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. For the Lich King. What is it now? This is more like it. At last.
It cannot be. A forgotten one. Look to your defenses, Death Knight. Fight as you've never fought before.
Now, Frostmourne. Finally. At last. This is more like it.
We cannot take them all. Hurry, Death Knight. Up the stairwell. Hurry.
We're running out of time in Ubarak. How far are we from the exit?
Not far. We have entered the Upper Kingdom. The exit should lead us to the base of the glacier itself. However, there are still hidden traps and pitfalls to account for.
Take cover!
Yes.
The entire passage collapsed. There's no time to dig through this. I'll have to move quickly and find my own way out. Hopefully Anubarak and the others survived.